Really been enjoying the Ecclesiastes study myself. I'll have to agree with Danny. I've been probably benefiting more than anybody else. I mean, I'll speak for Dylan himself. I'm sure he could say the same thing. Any teacher always benefits the most. And the last study that I did on Sunday morning on what we call it, wise worship, it convicted me in many ways. This one on money has convicted me in several ways. So I'm preaching at myself here this evening, and I hope that you can learn exactly what Solomon is trying for us to take home with us. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 8 through 20, I've called this sermon More Money, More Problems, and you'll understand why, as it's mostly about money. Let's read verse 8, and I'm reading from the New King James Version. He says, "If you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, do not marvel at the matter, for high official watches over high official, and higher officials are over them. Moreover, the profit of the land is for all. Even the king is served from the field. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there's nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil, just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. Here is what I've seen. It's good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor, in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart." I'm not going to examine every single minute phrase in these verses. We're going to do some kind of, I can't think of what I'm talking about. We're going to do some broader level observation this evening, maybe I should say commentary. And most of this passage is a under the sun perspective. Most of it's how life is under the sun. And then in the process of Solomon telling us things from an earthly perspective, a lot of what he tells us is true. This is one of those episodes where, from an earthly perspective, these things are very true. In verses 8 through 20, basically what Solomon is doing is he's searching in the money drawer for the meaning to life. And he did that previously in chapter 4 and verse 6. And this is the second time that he's done this. So as we said in one of our previous studies, sometimes you go and you're looking for something and you go back to look where you've already looked to see, did you miss something? Is it there? And that's again what he's doing. He's going back to look for meaning and satisfaction in money. And as I said, it's already been brought up in chapter 4. I said verse 6, but I meant to say verse 8. Notice if you read chapter 4, verse 8, maybe on the previous page of your Bible, I don't know. It pretty well just sums up verses 8 through 17 of chapter 5 in one verse. It says, "There is one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors. Nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is a vanity and a grave misfortune." Well, even if you don't understand what that means, hopefully you will by the end of it. But ultimately, what you need to understand, what Solomon is trying to get to is that the ultimate meaning of life, and really any type of satisfaction at all, is not found in money. If you think that it is, then you just haven't thought long enough. And he's going to give you several evidences from our actual human experience that we can all relate to that's going to prove this very true. The outline of my study, I've already got behind on these. The outline of my study is going to be like this. In verses 8 through 9, I think this is a very clean breakdown of the chapter. This makes a lot of sense when you read it, but verses 8 through 9 is about how the more government you have, the more problems you have. And this is not a political based point here. This is just the point that Solomon is making here, and we'll understand what he means. The more money you have, the more problems you have. Verses 10 through 17. And then finally, verses 18 through 20, the more God you have, the more meaning you have. And that's going to be our three main points, our outline for this study. And hopefully, by the time the last three verses are an above the sun, a very positive ending, one of the most positive passages you're going to find in the book of Ecclesiastes. So we'll look forward to building up to that. Let's just get right into the first part of this. And I'm not sure, I'm sorry, I don't know what's up with this circle in the corner. I didn't put that there. Somebody is playing tricks on me. But you'll just have to bear with me on that. I'm as annoyed as you are. Verse 8 introduces this idea of more government. The more government you have, the more problems you have. It says in the New King James Version, if you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, don't marvel at the matter, for high official watches over high official, and higher officials are over them. Now, if that just does this right here, don't worry. That's exactly what it did to me. And I read it like 100 times, and I'm like, what is he saying? And then as I'm reading, sometimes I don't just live in a commentary, but sometimes when you just don't know what something means, you got to consult some other sources and scholars. So that's what I did here, and then I felt better because I was told that this is a very difficult verse to translate. And a lot of times when it's something that just seems so obscure, you can't crack it. A lot of times it is a translation issue, and it all comes down to how this verse is translated. It comes down to that phrase that I have bolded, watches over. That's the English translation in the New King James, but the Hebrew word is shomer, or not sure how you say that, but that's the Hebrew word that English translation is coming from. And how this word is translated kind of turns the passage on a hinge. So I've looked at a couple of different translations, and there's two major views of how this should be translated and kind of what this is communicating, what Solomon is saying. The first view is the idea that, and this is the Christian Standard Bible that I put up here, this translation. It's the idea that Solomon's saying the problem with the oppression of the poor and the injustice going rampant is because there's corruption and tyranny within governments. Not necessarily the Israelite government only, but just that's how human government is. There's corruption in it. And so the CSB reads, there's all these things because, the italicized part, because one official protects another official and higher officials protect them. And isn't this true? I mean, unless you live blindly with your fingers stopping up your ears, I mean, this is true. Even within local governments, this is true. But there's been enough scandals and enough can of worms opened, in federal government. We know that this happens. The guys at the top, looking out for each other so that they stay at the top, basically. And the guys at the bottom, the poor people, staying at the bottom because it's hard to break that barrier, generally speaking. The New Living Translation basically translates it in a way that says the problem's not necessarily corruption, not to say that there's not corruption in government, but rather this translation is proposing that it's more a matter of bureaucracy. And that may be a big word that some of you younger people don't understand. Well, just follow along with me. The italicized says, these problems exist for every official is under orders from higher up, and matters of justice get lost in red tape and bureaucracy. Now, that's a very loose translation, shall we say, but it's getting the thought across that this is really saying about government, there's so many levels to it. For something to get passed, for something to get done to fix a problem or fix oppression and injustice, it's got to go through like 10 layers. And by the time it gets to the top, it's gone. It's lost. It's lost in the red tape, as they say. That's bureaucracy. And that's why this exists. And this is why the world is the way it is. So those are a couple of different translations, a couple of different views. I don't know. I don't like doing this, but I don't know that I really have an opinion which one it is. I don't know that it really matters here. The point is not, is it bureaucracy or is it corruption in governments? Because we know they both exist. The point really is that government itself is not going to fix your problems. In fact, much of the time, and obviously having government is better than having no government. Although we live in anarchy, we'll figure that out pretty quick. So it's kind of a necessary evil, but nonetheless, if you are depending and thinking that government's going to fix all the oppression and injustice in the world, you're going to find out that a lot of times it contributes to injustices, especially on a personal, one-on-one basis. And so it's not there. Verse 8 is saying it's not in government. And verse 9 kind of just continues this. It says, and going back to the New King James, verse 9 says, moreover, the profit of the land is for all. Even the king is served from the field. And again, a difficult verse to translate. And so we look at what is this really saying if we were to look at what it literally says. Well, E.M. Provan in his commentary says if it were translated as literally as possible, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. It would say, profit from land in all is this, a king in respect of a cultivated field. This is a side point. This is a great example of why you really don't want the most literal translation that you could possibly have, because you wouldn't be able to read it and make sense of it. This is how most all verses would appear. It helps to have a commentary that helps bring some of the meaning out, people that know the original languages. Well, anyways, Provan says that you can see obviously a very obvious parallel between land and field. This is called a parallelism, where the first line repeats the second line and might expand on it a little bit. Well, it's a repetition of the idea of land and field, and then if you look at the parallel, that would mean that prophet and king are parallel to one another. So what's that mean? Well, I think that his commentary on this makes sense, and this is what he says. He says the sense is that the only real profit made by workers from tending their crops is the king who stands at the pinnacle of the corrupt regime and derives the ultimate benefit. We might paraphrase it as follows: in the end, the only gain from hard work in the fields is the monarchy, or the king, which flourishes in the soil of the worker's labor. Let you look at that for just a minute, because that's a lot to take in. And if you don't understand what that is saying, basically, okay, verse 8 was saying what? Verse 8 was saying the poor are oppressed while the government does nothing, basically. Verse 9 is saying the farmers do the hard work and the king eats the labor, the spoils, or he eats the produce. Now, some of you young people, I don't know, some of y'all are starting to work jobs. If you haven't ever worked for an actual employer that gives you your after-tax wages, you're going to find out that you're not getting as much as you thought you were going to get. I remember my first paycheck, and you're like, what happened? They promised me, what was it, $8 and $7.50 an hour, and I got way less than that. That's because this right here. Government's going to get their share. And they're going to take it out from the top, and then you'll get what's left over. You did all the work, though. Isn't that a little unfair? That's the world we live in. Some countries are worse than others, but that's just the world we live in. And so again, if you think that government is the answer to all this, it ain't. Government's self-serving. It's going to protect itself first, and the people in government's going to get theirs first, and then you might get yours. But this is kind of how it is. I didn't mean to go to that passage yet, but we might as well. God promised Israel would suffer like this at the hands of their king that they asked for. In this 1 Samuel 8 passage, some of you may be familiar, but I don't want to assume. Israel was an up-and-coming nation after they had come out of the wilderness. They had conquered the land of Canaan, and God ultimately was directly leading the people, telling them through the judges what to do and so forth. But finally, they wanted a king to be like the nations around them. And so God told Samuel to go tell the people, okay, you want a king? I'll give you a king. And this is what kings do. And this is what they're going to do to you. So he says in verse 10, so Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. And he said, this will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his horsemen. And some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s. Will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest. And I'm going to have to go to my papers here because I can't read that because that dot. Where are we at here? And some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over there, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. He'll take a tenth of your grain and your vintage, and he'll give it to his officers and servants. And he'll take your male and female servants, your finest young men and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He'll take a tenth of your sheep, and you'll be his servants. And you'll cry out in that day because your king whom you've chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day because he told you this in advance. And what did they say? They said, give it to us. They asked for that. And they got it in King Saul and many of the kings after. That's what they experienced. That's what Solomon, being the highest position in the land, saw, obviously, within the ranks of his government, was this type of behavior. And he's journaling and he's telling us, this is just how it is. And it's what we see today. Again, if you don't see these things, then you just aren't paying attention. This is just the world that we live in. And it's not fair. This is a visual demonstration. I like this because it really gets the point across. You got the workers in the field, slaves in this picture, Civil War era, and you got the people sitting at the fancy dinner tables, the politicians, figuring out how much they're going to get of these laborers in the field and what's going to happen to those laborers and everything else. And that's what it looks like visually. I thought that was a very good visual demonstration of it all. But the NIV says on verse 9, the increase from the land is taken by all, the king himself profits from the fields. I think that translation probably gets across ultimately what Solomon is saying. So conclusion number 1, government doesn't solve our problems. And some people look at the shortcomings of government and they think becoming rich or erasing poverty will fix the shortcomings of government. And so if we can somehow personally get rich or make it so that the poor no longer exist, poverty is done away with, then it'll all be right. But verses 10 through 7 tells us that more money ain't going to fix it. You can throw more money at it and it's just going to get bigger, the problem. More money, more problems. So let's read verse 10. He says there in the New King James, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity or vapor, as I think it should be read. Now, what I decided to do for these verses 10 through 15, instead of just spending a detailed amount of time on each verse, I read something, basically a summary of each verse by Randy Alcorn in a commentary, and I thought he did such a good job of summarizing the meaning of the proverb and maintaining a flow of thought through it all, so that if I would just read the verse and then read his one-line summary of it and put it all together, I think that you'll benefit the most by just doing that. And by the end, we'll put all these points together that each one of these proverbs and each verse teaches us, and this is what we'll learn about money. And the ultimate conclusion is that it's just going to bring you more problems. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. So in verse 10, Solomon says, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. That's saying in modern English, the more you have, the more you want. That's true. You ever experienced that? Have you ever gotten something that you really, really wanted? There was something else after that you really, really wanted because it doesn't satisfy. Verse 10, again, this is the second part of the proverb. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. Randy Alcorn says, the more you have, the less you're satisfied. More of the same. Verse 11, when goods increase, they increase who eat them. The more you have, the more people will come after it. You make friends when you get rich. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? Verse 11 says, the more you have, the more you realize it does you no good. Verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. It's saying, the more you have, the more you have to worry about. Can't sleep because you're worrying about whether or not your things are all locked up tight enough to be not stolen. Verse 13, there's a severe evil which I've seen under the sun, riches kept for their owners to his hurt. That's just saying the more you have, the more you can hurt yourself by holding on to it. That's how investments work. You hold on to it too long and it's a bad investment. Verse 14, but those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there's nothing in his hand. It's saying the more you have to lose. Verse 15, as he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. That's a mouthful. But what it means is the more you have, the more you'll leave behind when you die. And finally, if you put it all together, let's just read all those together. The more you have, the more you want. the less you're satisfied, the more people will come after it, the more you realize it does you no good, the more you have to worry about, the more you can hurt yourself by holding on to it, the more you have to lose, the more you'll leave behind. That's what money is good for. It's really not good for a whole lot. I mean, it has a purpose. Don't get me wrong, and he's actually going to speak to it having a true purpose that's a good purpose. Again, many people have made the statement, and I'm sure I'm just repeating it to you. It's not the money itself that's the root of all evil. It's the love of money, right? Money has a true, real purpose, and it's in itself good. But certainly if we think it's going to solve all our problems, it's not. Verses 16 through 17, in fact, tell us that the more you desire things and money, the more sorrow, sickness, and anger that it's going to leave you with. That's exactly what he says in verse 16. And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. That's what the love of money will leave you feeling like. Sad, crying, sick over what you've lost or what you could have made, and angry about all of it. And I know I've gotten angry about money. I know I've spent far too much time thinking about financial situations or making a deal, making a buck. But we just need to be a little bit more loose with money. Be wise, because you can live so loose with money that you become a fool, but don't find your ultimate meaning there, because you're not gonna. The second conclusion I would take from this is that the wealth we chase is not going to remedy the world that we live in. It doesn't take care of all the poverty. The poor will be with you always, Jesus said. It's never going to go away. No government's going to come along and fix poverty. Neither will personal gain of money fix your problems. And so that brings us to point number 3, and that I've called the more God you have, the more meaning you have. And that stands in opposition and contrast to money and government. Now, the natural conclusion that you might come to is that if money's no good, if it's worthless, you might be thinking that, then shouldn't we all just burn it? Just burn our money. It's not going to do you any good. If I'm just going to, if I'm going to do exactly what the Bible says, then I just take my money out of my wallet and set it on fire. Is that what he's saying? Should I just go to my neighbor next door and slap the shrimp and steak out of his hand and stop spending time enjoying steak and shrimp and money and all that, and focus on the things that really matter, and just really kill his Friday night? Is that what Solomon's trying to get us to think like and behave like? Well, I don't think so, but he does give the secret to all of this in verses 18 through 20. He says something 4 times in the last 3 verses that he doesn't say at all in the first, 12 verses. Can you identify what the one word is? It's a 3-letter word, by the way, that he doesn't mention at all until verses 18 through 20. And it's the secret to meaning and true joy and happiness. Now, it's a trick, almost. I didn't intend it to be a trick, but I asked this before church, and somebody told me, joy. Well, that's a really good guess. It's a 3-letter word. I didn't realize there was 2 3-letter words that could be answered, possibilities. It's God. That's the answer. God's name is not mentioned at all from verses 8 to 17, because it's Solomon telling us things from an earthly perspective. But in verses 18 through 20, he mentions his name 4 times because he's telling us from a heavenly perspective where the true meaning of life comes from. God's the answer. Without God, there's no real meaning to anything in this life. Without God, a meal is just a means to an end, and you scarf it down as quickly as you can for all the quick eaters in the room. Work isn't anything more than a burden, and that's how it is if God's not in the picture. Money's just something that's going to cause you more problems. That's what we just learned, is it not? Well, with God, Solomon says this. We didn't actually read the verses, so let's read the verses 18 through 20. Here's what I've seen. It's good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. I've underlined there the three things that he emphasizes, that being eating, drinking, and working, or labor is the word that he uses there specifically. Those are three things that he's commenting on and saying there's actually meaning in these things. And from an earthly perspective, they're all dead ends, right? You're just pursuing them for themselves. But with God, they actually have real meaning. With God, you can enjoy a meal because you realize God gave you that meal as a gift. It tastes great. I had an amazing meal. Yeah, I tell you what, go to Nana's Italian restaurant in Huntsville, Alabama. Me and Krista went there on our way back from our anniversary trip, and it was amazing. And I went on about it a while. I really enjoyed it. It was some of the best Italian I've ever had. You can enjoy that meal because you realize it's a gift from God, right? You can enjoy a cup of coffee. Not because the effects of that coffee or the flavor of the coffee is going to remain forever in your taste buds, but because you know that it's a gift from God. God put coffee on the earth to be enjoyed, and you should enjoy it. You can enjoy your job. You know, some people, your coworkers, your boss, they can try to make your life miserable, and they can make your life miserable if you let them, but it's hard to make somebody miserable that's just thankful they got a job. When I'm thankful I got a job because I know that God's given me this job, and I go to work and I remember that, my boss don't have any power over me. God's the only one that has power over me, and you can try to make my life miserable, but you got to have the heavenly perspective on things. People can take away your money, but they can't take away your gratitude, and the only person that has control over your joy is you. Amen. And so we need to think about these things every time we get up, every time we take a sip of coffee. Enjoy it. You know, don't just rush around all the time. Think about these things in the moment and soak up the moment. I know that sounds like worldly advice, but this is godly advice from the pen of Solomon, Ecclesiastes 5, verses 18 through 20. Verse 19 says, "This is the gift of God." This is the gift of God. I remember my dad, sometimes we'd be making lunch in the kitchen, and I'd be getting out the bread, and he would quote that Matthew 4, verse 4 passage, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God," he'd tell me. And he was just using it as a teaching moment. And that's a good passage to teach your kids when you're making a sandwich with bread. But here's another good passage to use. When you're making that bread, this is a gift of God. Ecclesiastes 5:19. That's another good teaching passage to use with your kids and for yourself. There are other passages that reinforce this. And by the way, we're almost done. Psalm 104, verse 14, the psalmist says, he being God, causes the grass to grow for the cattle and vegetation for the service of man, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine that makes glad the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread which strengthens the man's heart. Every one of these things are things that God created for man for his enjoyment and for his enjoyment. James 1:17 says, "Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights." And if these are gifts from God, then they came down from the Father of lights. They're good gifts. 1 Timothy 6, verse 17 is more forward. It says, "Command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy." And when he said all things, he meant all good things. If there's anything that's good, it was given to us. Why? To enjoy. And so enjoy it. That's what he tells us to do. Now, I will say that verses 18 through 20 of Ecclesiastes 5, that is, going back to Ecclesiastes 5, that's not an exhaustive list of God's gifts. Remember, he mentioned eating and drinking and work. But that's not to be taken as an exhaustive list. It's a representative list of some of God's common blessings that he's given us that kind of stands for everything he's given us. I like this quote from David Gibson. He says, "Rather, it's a representative list of what it looks like to love life and to live it to the full. These things are a way of saying when God made the world, he made it good. And no amount of being a Christian or being spiritual ever changes the fact that God puts you in a physical world with hands and food and drink and culture and relationships and beauty. And he puts you in that world to enjoy that world and appreciate it." And so, with that being said, I would encourage you to go enjoy a good steak and enjoy it as a gift from God. Don't you just love sermons like this? Oh, preacher's telling me to go get the 20 ounce, the filet mignon. Watch a baseball game, if you're me. If you don't like baseball, watch a game that you do like. Go watch Pride and Prejudice. Travel to see the Rocky Mountains. Man, the first time I saw the Rockies, it took me my breath away. I couldn't believe it. Swim in the ocean. That's not my thing, but it might be yours. I would highly recommend having a piece of tiramisu. That's just amazing, and it's just such a blessing from God when you taste that tiramisu. Take a Broadway play in. Get up early enough to watch the sunrise. Stay up late enough to watch the sunset and just soak it in. Depending on who you are, hold a baby and just enjoy holding a baby, or don't hold a baby. Listen to a waterfall. We did that this past weekend. It was just amazing. I didn't know that Alabama had such beauty. Take your wife on a date. Just do those simple things and do them with intent. And this is where I am preaching to myself, because I need to hear these things. Christians shouldn't be known. Now, historically, Christians, especially if you go back to the medieval ages, have been known as curmudgeons that don't know how to enjoy anything. In fact, they preach asceticism, self-infliction, cutting themselves out of repentance and signs. And that's kind of what Christians became known for in the medieval ages. And even today, there's two swings of Christianity. There's God saved me, so I'm going to go sin as boldly as I possibly can. There's that brand of Christianity. And then there's the kind of buzzkills that don't know how to enjoy anything. But God is the secret to enjoying anything in life. And the point was, the main point that I was making here is more God, there's more meaning in your life. That's what you need to remember. And so the third conclusion that I would take away, if I was to sum up verses 18 through 20, and I was to put them into application points, I would say that Solomon is telling us to be working, because there's real joy to be had in working. When you can't work, then you'll know. Be grateful. Be enjoying God's gifts. Be content with what you have. And I pulled in this point from chapter 4 about be generous, share with others, and find friends by sharing with others, because this is something I think kind of rounds out the picture. You can do all those things, and there's a lot of rich people who don't, they enjoy the waterfalls and the sunrises, but they don't share. And so I wanted to pull that point in from chapter 4, because that's a big one as well. And so if we reviewed it all, the outline of our study this evening was verses 8 through 9. The more government that you have, the more problems you have typically. And it doesn't solve all the problems in the world. The more money you have, the more problems you have. And it's not going to solve your personal problems, and it's not going to solve those government problems. And the more God you have, the more real meaning you have. That was the intent. So if we read all those conclusions that we took from each section, it's that government doesn't solve our problems, the wealth we chase won't remedy the world we live in, and be a working, grateful, enjoying, content, generous people. That's what God's called us to be. Now we got to live it. We got to go out those doors. I'm not just talking about having a steak. We got to actually go out those doors and live this and be that type of person. And that's a lot easier said than done. But let's take this as an opportunity this weekend to enjoy it. Let's practice it for 3 solid days at this Young Speakers meeting. We're about to have lots of food. Don't scarf it down. Really enjoy it. I could say more, but I'll be quiet now. Wasn't that the application from Sunday? Be quiet.
If you like this sermon, do 3 things for me. Give it a thumbs up below, click the subscribe button, and share it with a friend either on social media or text. This helps the channel grow. It helps the word get out there. It's something really easy that you can do to affect the spreading of the gospel. This has been the Chapel Grove Church of Christ. Visit our website at chapelgrovechurch.com. We'll see you next time.